Talking today about a 2020 documentary called I Am Greta, which I had never heard of before I saw it, but maybe you've heard of it. Let me know in the comments down below if you've heard of this. How did you hear of this? How well known is this? I've never heard of it, but then I've been living abroad for many years, so I tend to be a little bit out of things sometimes. Now, the reason I saw this movie, even though I had never heard of it, was that I've been working as a substitute teacher recently. And quite often when you substitute teach, the lesson plan is put on this movie for the kids. Now, usually that means I only see 40 minutes of a movie because, the class periods are only 45, 50 minutes long. And of course, it takes some time to settle the kids down, take attendance, etc. So I usually only get to see 40 minutes of a movie. But in this particular case, I happened to be working at the same school for several days in a row, and for 3 consecutive days, the lesson plan was to show this movie. So I actually ended up seeing the whole movie. It was not a movie that I would have watched otherwise, but I have watched it, and for some time now I've made it a habit to review every movie I watch. So here's my review. So I've never heard of this movie before, this documentary, but I have of course heard of Greta Thunberg. I just didn't know that this particular documentary existed. Greta, as I'm sure you know, is a climate activist who became famous at the age of 15 because she started a climate strike outside the parliament in Sweden. She's Swedish, and she's an activist for climate action, activist against climate change, which I'm sure you already know. Now, when it comes to the issue of climate change, this is an issue that I, perhaps like many of you, am capable of pushing out of my head for long periods of time and then becoming obsessively worried about it for long periods of time, largely depending on what is in the local news cycle or who I happen to talk to last or what's in my Twitter feed or something like that. But the point being, I am capable of getting myself worked up about this issue. And in fact, on this channel, I've toyed with the idea of talking about it regularly. I'm not doing that now, but some of you may remember in the past I tried to do vlogs on global warming, an idea which I didn't stick with. But point being, it's an issue which concerns me. Now, I mention that because I'm going to try to review the movie as a movie and not get sidetracked by talking about the larger issue. The larger issue is important. This is a movie review, so I want to talk about the movie specifically. So, it's a documentary. It came out in 2020. According to Wikipedia, they started filming on it in 2018. And it was filmed in 2018 and 2019. It's a documentary that consists only of footage. So there's no talking heads, there's no narration. It's just only footage of Greta and her father and occasionally her mother going around from place to place. And you, as a viewer, take all these bits of footage and you just have to piece together the story yourself. It works well for what it is. It starts off with Greta just sitting outside of the parliament with her sign striking for climate justice. Of course, because she's Swedish and this is all taking place in Sweden, there are a lot of subtitles. So, it's one of those documentaries where you have to like subtitles or be willing to put up with them. it's a little bit unclear to me how far back this footage goes. You get the impression that this is Greta from the beginning, just sitting out there with her lonely strike. But there's very little footage of it, and it seems to move quite quickly to when Greta is already a celebrity. So I suspect what happened is that the filming already started once Greta was a celebrity. It makes sense, right? Because if she wasn't already a celebrity, then why would the film crew come to film her? And it would explain why the documentary spends so little time on her rise to fame. Now, I understand for practical reasons that you would not make a documentary on somebody who is not yet famous. It is a bit of a pity, though, that we don't get that story, because I think that could be a very interesting story. How did Greta go from just a girl sitting outside the parliament to someone who captured the attention of the media? Although maybe that would be a documentary about the media and not about Greta. Anyways, there's a lot of things to say. The documentary focuses on Greta's character and how determined she is for her cause. In a way that you can't help but say is admirable, and especially for somebody so young. I would have hesitated to talk too much about Greta's autism or her Asperger's because that just seemed like it wasn't relevant to her cause. But the movie spotlights it. The documentary spotlights it. So I think when you're talking about the documentary, you have to talk about it. And the question which I think the documentary throws up is Greta doing all of this because of her autism or Asperger's, in spite of her autism or Asperger's? By the way, Asperger's apparently is just another word for something on the autism spectrum, is my understanding. At one time they used to be classified differently, now it's classified together. Both terms are used in the movie, autism and Asperger's. But anyways, is Greta doing this because of her condition, in spite of her condition, or does her condition just have nothing to do with it? Watching the movie, the question you can't help but ask is, okay, given the seriousness of this problem, given that we're headed for a mass extinction event, why isn't everybody like Greta? Why aren't we all upending our lives to just sit and protest until something gets done? So there's that. But then the other part of it is, as Greta becomes a media celebrity and she gets confronted with her fame, her reactions to this are often understated or under-emotional. And, the type of fame that is visited upon her is, that type of worldwide celebrity is visited on very few people, isn't it? And it's what many people dream of, or would sell their soul for that kind of worldwide fame. There are footage parts. There is footage of Greta looking at the news of her on her phone, kind of checking the social media on the phone, seeing all the headlines she's generating, and appears to be gleeful about it. She's talking about it with her father, and yet it's not ecstatic. It's a bit understated. And of course, if you've seen any footage of Greta meeting the world leaders, you can see that there seems to be maybe a little bit of a awkwardness, or maybe a little bit of subdued emotion, which may be because of her condition, or maybe just because she's so dedicated to her cause, or maybe she's so dedicated to their cause because of her condition. Like I said, I'd feel a little bit bad commenting on all this if the movie hadn't put a spotlight on it first. So I think because the movie put such a spotlight on it, I think you have to mention it. The movie, I think it's meant to be inspiring. It's a little bit hard to tell. But, it came out in 2020 and is showing events from 2019. And watching it now in 2025, it's hard not to watch this and think more about the failures of the climate movement than its success. So one of the messages the movie is showing is, look at how one person can change the world. So Greta, only 15 years old, just a sheer determination. She decides she's got to do something and starts a movement that snowballs, where all these people become inspired by her. Now there is some awkwardness that she is confronting with her movement, whether it's about her or whether it's about the environment. And you have so many, the documentary shows footage, lots of footage of people saying to Greta, I'm proud of you, you're my hero, we're so inspired by you, it's so great what you're doing, look at everything. And Greta does at times appear pleased by this, but she also appears to realize that things are getting off track. And occasionally she'll say, it's not about me, it's about the cause. It's not about me, it's the cause. At the same time, you do sometimes get the feeling that she is enjoying this adoration. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But yeah, so there's an inspiring message about one person who can change the world, even though the movie does seem to show the downfalls of activism as celebrity. Or activism as cult of personality. But then, you're watching this in 2025 and you're like, wow, we have not made progress on this. Emissions have continued to go up since this documentary has been made. We have not succeeded in cutting emissions. We are looking in worse shape than we are at the time this documentary was made. And you're watching this, and in the knowledge in the back of your mind, you're thinking about there's this tremendous urgency in the documentary about, we got to change it now, we got to change this now. And Greta, of course, is she's going to one of these conferences, and she says, they say this conference is the last chance we have to make changes. And I just thought to myself, how many times have I heard that before, right? All right, this is absolutely the last chance we have to save the earth. You always seem to hear this before one of these climate conferences, and yet the changes that need to be made never seem to be made. So that's very depressing. Now, I'm not sure if this is intentional or not. Maybe this was intentional all along. The movie seems, the documentary, whether it's aware of it or not, whether the filmmakers are aware of it or not, I think are seeming to show some of the pitfalls in Greta's strategy. So she meets with the Prime Minister of France. The President of France. And the President of France said, tell me, what do you think needs to be done? And you think to yourself, okay, how many activists get themselves into that position? Usually activists are always on the outside trying to worm their way into the circles of power. Here, Greta is sitting right with the President of France. The cameras are going. He said, what needs to be done? And she says, we need to be better. We need to be leaders in this climate movement, stuff like that. And you think to yourself, no, Greta, don't say that. you, if you don't tell him what to do, he's not going to do anything. You've got to say, look, we've got to reduce our carbon emissions in 5 years. Here's how we do it. We need to tax this or pass this bill, or I don't know. I don't know, but hopefully somebody out there does. There's some sort of technocrat, environmentalist who knows exactly what political measures need to be taken, what the timetable is, how these can be passed. Because, well, there are two sides to this, isn't there? There's the environmental side of, the sheer mathematics of it, what emissions need to be cut by when, how, and then there's the political side of it. How can this possibly be sold? But Greta doesn't say any of that. She just says we've got to be better. And then she is mystified when things don't change. Because she tells them, you just have to do the right thing. And then the politicians just keep on doing what they were doing before. And she becomes more and more irate about this. She says that they don't want to change. They're not listening. She, to her credit, by the end of the documentary, I think she is realizing what has happened. Is that they are just bringing her in for the photo op and have no intention of changing anything. And we know she realizes this because she says it explicitly. Now, it's easy to criticize Greta, right? Like, Greta, you blew it. You were right there with the the president of France. You didn't give him any concrete objectives about what politically needs to happen. But she's only 15, right? Or 16 when this documentary was made. Of course, she's older now, but this is older footage in the documentary. So, you think to yourself, could I have done any better? Could I at 15 have done that? No, certainly not. So, it's not Greta's fault for playing the part that has been allotted for her. But you think to yourself, wouldn't it be nice to get an environmentalist in that room? An environmentalist and somebody who knows about politics, who can say, look, this is what's politically realistic. This is what we can do. This is what we have to do. You can do this, this, and this, and get stuff done within 5 years. Somebody with a concrete plan, a timetable, a way to get things done. If he had been in that room with the president of France, but then you think to yourself, but of course he wouldn't be in that room. Because he's not a darling little 15-year-old girl who's sitting outside of the parliament and has just become this media celebrity. Or she. I shouldn't assume that the climate expert is a male scientist. He or she. And you maybe even suspect that the politicians know exactly what they're doing. They're inviting Greta for the photo op and the handshake and everything like that because maybe she's just going to tell them to be better, and that kind, without having any sort of holding them to agree to any specific promises, very specific promises about, this bill or this proposal or something like that, then they can just ignore her. And then she just gets ignored. Now, I should make a big caveat here, maybe something I should have said earlier, but I forgot to say, is that I only know what the documentary has shown me. So, who knows? Perhaps there's footage where Greta actually does advocate very specific proposals when she's talking to a congressman or a president or a politician. And those just weren't included in the documentary. So the reality may be more complex or more more than the documentary is showing. But just based on what the documentary is showing you, that seems to be either intentionally or unintentionally, to me, what the message of the documentary is. You're really inspired by Greta as somebody who has created this movement, and yet you can see completely how the politicians are playing her. And by the end of the documentary, she has realized how the politicians are playing her. She doesn't give up, to her credit. She keeps on doing what she's doing, but at least as far as we see in the documentary, there's no indication that she's altering her course. She's invited in front of the UN, and she just scolds them, like, how dare you, you hypocrites, blah 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 blah. But that doesn't seem to say, okay, this is what we can do right now. This is what I want you to pass this year, this proposal, this timetable. That never seems to get entered into it. And again, she's only 15, 16, so you can't really criticize her. And maybe her role is just to get enthusiasm for the environment. Maybe that's just what she's doing here, and we need other people to step in and fill the other gaps. The politicians know how to play her very well, and she realizes in the documentary that those politicians know how to play her very well. I'm beginning to repeat myself, so maybe it's time to move on to the next point. Documentary also shows her relationship with her father, which is interesting. It's one of those documentaries where you can you see them arguing, and you're kind of so engrossed in the scene that it takes a second before you realize, wait, they must know that they're arguing in front of cameras. So it looks like this intimate father-daughter moment, but you think, okay, I'm only seeing half the room, and there's a whole camera crew here in the back half of the room or something. So it's a little bit surreal that way, but I suspect what happened to them is what happens to a lot of documentary subjects, is they just get so used to being followed around by the camera for the whole time that they start to revert back to their natural forms. So, it sounds like on the documentary, Greta's mother and father were not pushing her in to do this. It sounds like they did not actually initially approve of her climate strikes, but they let her. They were permissive enough that they let her do her thing. Now that she's become this huge media celebrity, her parents are very, very proud of her, but also protective of her. There's an interesting little scene where Greta is going in. She's going to go into a meeting where a bunch of people are waiting for her. And her dad is saying, Greta, you have to eat. It's as simple as that. You cannot go in there without eating. You need to eat. And she says, they're waiting for me. And he says, I don't care. Let them wait. You are going to eat. And this goes back and forth between them for a bit. They have a few back and forths in this documentary where they both stake out a position and then just end up repeating the same thing back to each other, and it's a battle of wills a little bit. But again, here she is. She's a worldwide celebrity, but she's still a child, and her father has to make sure that she eats. She doesn't go through the whole day rushing from meeting to meeting to meeting. She actually takes time to eat. Her mother's a little bit more in the background. It looks like the father is the one who is traveling with her. We get some insights into the cost that this is taking on Greta, being away from her family, being away from her dogs, missing her routine, especially when she chooses to cross the Atlantic Ocean on a ship. And you probably remember this because it was news at the time. Greta refusing to fly because flying is bad for the environment. She's going to stick to her principles. She crossed the Atlantic on a ship. And you know, here to give credit where credit is due, this is, I think, one very positive thing about Greta and Greta's movement is she is actively modeling the change she would like to see. So even though she appears to be a bit weak in terms of policy proposals, at least as shown in this documentary, she is able to model living an environmentally responsible lifestyle. Although how realistic it is for all of us to cross the oceans on boat, I'm not sure. You know, because I've got married to a Vietnamese national. My family is back and forth from America to Vietnam, and we've not done that by boat, and don't know how realistic that is to do by boat. What am I doing? I'm doing what I said I wouldn't do, and getting distracted from the movie. Just talking about the documentary now, huh? Just talking about the documentary. So, yeah, those scenes of Greta on the boat, and it looks like the documentary crew was allowed in the boat with her to film what looked like it was, on the whole, a rather miserable boat trip across the Atlantic to get to America. But even though she was miserable and a little bit tearful and depressed at times through that journey, she did it and got to America, where she continues to inspire people. So it's good that Greta is inspiring people to take action. I think we need that. I think we also need people who can get in the room with the politicians and actually give them very specific directions on what needs to be done. But there's definitely a part to play for Greta, and it's good that she's out there doing what she's doing. And it's an entertaining documentary. It's available on Hulu. If you have Hulu, or otherwise I'm sure you can get the DVD off Amazon or something like that. It's worth watching. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you very much.